I lost my legs trying to save Bob. For 3 years of marriage, he allowed his friends and family to insult me. I confronted him, but he impatiently pressed his temples, saying they were just stating facts. That day, I didn't beg you to save me. No one asked if I wanted to. All the admiration from my youth turned to ashes in that moment. That night, I spiked his milk with sleeping pills and cut off his legs while he slept. I held him, howling in pain, until he fell asleep, and when I opened my eyes, I was back 3 years ago, before the accident happened. Bob is really tough, being with a dead cripple for 3 years. Dude, you don't get it. Maybe Bob has some special kink, this cripple in bed. Hee. I say it's Joe being too scheming, using one leg to tie Bob down for life. Laughter echoed from the hotel suite while I stood outside clenching my fists. It wasn't until the laughter stopped that Bob's deep voice came through. That's enough. Someone pretended to be surprised. No way. You didn't actually fall in love with that cripple, did you? After a silence, I heard the words, how could that be? I mean, I don't have any special kinks. Dealing with a cripple every day is annoying. If it weren't for 3 years ago, sister-in-law, why are you here? The door to the suite opened, and everyone's eyes turned towards me, mocking, pitying, but not surprised. Bob had a moment of panic and guilt. He walked over to me, blaming me. Don't you know what situation you're in? What are you doing here? I sat in the wheelchair, meeting his eyes, quietly lifting my phone. You asked me to come. An hour ago, Bob texted me, saying he drank too much and needed me to pick him up. Bob pushed me into the suite, sighing with his eyes closed. Are you happy now? The man who had just mocked me raised his hand and said, sorry, sister-in-law, we were just joking, wanted to see how much you cared about Bob. He said they sent the text from Bob's phone, just to prove that I loved him. These people didn't hide their disdain in their tone. I looked at Bob in confusion, as he seemed to have known all along. I didn't know you would really come. He saw my thoughts and helplessly pressed his temples. You, too. Think about it. Even if I drank too much, there are designated drivers, friends, who couldn't take me home. What could you do by coming? I followed his gaze to my legs. What could I do? Probably just frantically rushing out with my wheelchair after receiving a text, struggling to get into a taxi. Now that I think about it, I really was foolish, rushing to become the joke in their eyes. Since everything is fine, I'll go back first. I lowered my head and wheeled away, but someone blocked my path. Don't leave so soon, Sister Joe. Wouldn't it be rude not to have a drink? Someone handed me a drink, but I am allergic to alcohol. I looked at Bob again, and he remained silent. Faced with the eyes of the entire room, I silently accepted the drink. Ha, truly worthy of Joe. Oh my God, he exclaimed as I splashed the drink on his face. What are you doing, you dead cripple? After the rush of happiness faded, I could occasionally feel Bob's helplessness. He always kept a distant attitude towards me. His friends weren't always like that towards me either. In reality, I understood they were just saying things for Bob. So I've said more than once, if it's because of saving him, it's unnecessary, we can divorce. But he always refused. Lisa sneered. You don't think my brother doesn't divorce you because he likes you, do you? She forcibly dragged me onto the wheelchair, and I struggled, but it was in vain. What could a cripple resist? She whispered in my ear, come on, I'll show you something entertaining. Lisa's idea of entertainment was Bob having intimate dates with other girls. Through the restaurant's window, I watched Bob fixing another girl's stray hair from her forehead. Love was about to overflow in his eyes. Lisa pursed her lips. See that? That's the person my brother likes. I didn't understand. Then why doesn't he divorce me? It's not me who's clingy, Lisa complained. It's because you took advantage of saving his life. If he divorces you, what will become of him? Ingrate. Who do you think you are? Pretending to be magnanimous. This is all your plot. I couldn't understand why everyone thought saving Bob was manipulative. I only lost my legs, while he lost his freedom. The people in the room were too absorbed, and didn't notice me not far outside the window. I smiled, wheeled closer, and gently tapped on the glass. Lisa didn't expect that I would do this. Her face stiffened. What are you doing? It's so funny. She brought me here, but only allowed me to grieve in secret after I finished reading. She couldn't stop me in time, and the two people in the room found us. They were startled, panic-stricken. Bob quickly appeared in front of me. Joe, listen to me. He didn't know what to say, looking at Lisa accusingly. Who told you to bring her here? Lisa pouted unhappily. I feel sorry for your sister-in-law, even though you two have been in love for years. I stood there in a daze. In love for years, but before I wanted to confess, I had asked Bob indirectly if he had a girlfriend. His answer was no, or I wouldn't have mustered the courage. Joe, you go home first. Bob scolded Lisa, then arranged for a car to take me home. Wait a minute. I raised my hand to stop him. I wanted to talk to the lady inside. Joe. Bob frowned. He wasn't happy. I gently took his hand. You better listen to me, or I won't mind shouting about your affair in the street. I'm disabled. I've seen strange looks over the years. I'm immune. You'll only embarrass yourselves. Bob's frown deepened, but he must care a lot about the person inside. The next moment, he pushed me into the restaurant. Bob, this is your wife, the one you saved before. The girl seemed to recognize me. She supported her head with one hand and smiled at me. Hello, I'm Sue, Bob's first love. Like the others, she acted like she had no malicious intent towards me, but it was all malicious. Bob, why don't you take your cousin to sit over there? I want to talk to Miss Joe. In just a few words, she took the initiative. Bob sat with Lisa not far away, looking at us with concern. Joe, Sue stirred her coffee leisurely. You know, if it weren't for you, it should have been me marrying Bob. I had no idea. I told her. I had never seen you in his circle. I didn't even know he had a first love. Sue looked up, her eyes somewhat resentful. We had a clandestine relationship because of my family. Bob said his family wouldn't approve. Only Lisa quietly supported us. We had been in love in secret for 2 years, ready to come clean to our families before the accident happened. Unfortunately, you got in the way. No wonder Lisa hated me so much when she found out I was going to marry Bob. But is it my fault? I asked Bob more than once if he had a girlfriend. It was his choice to hide it, and he chose to marry me after the earthquake. Sue saw my thoughts and chuckled. Are you curious why he insisted on marrying you? I looked up at her, my gut telling me this answer wasn't good. Because he found your secret love diary, Joe. When Sue said this, there was bitterness in her tone. It had to happen that way. In the end, he found it after you lost your legs and fell into a coma. Discovered in front of Bob's parents. And you say it wasn't intentional. Joe, my brain went blank. He had read my diary. Bob had wanted to act like he hadn't seen it, but Bob's mom caught a glimpse first. The elders meant well. I had grown up in front of them. Bob and Joe's families had been longtime friends. So that day, Bob's mom asked him, do you like Joe? She thought that if both people had feelings for each other, being together wouldn't be a bad thing. Bob, thinking it was pressure from his elders, replied, I will marry her. Under the pressure he thought he was under, he gave up Sue and married me. I see. I thought of my excitement and openness when I found out Bob was going to marry me. It was just a joke. Now he could divorce me, but he didn't. This was something I didn't understand. Sue gave a mocking smile. Because you're useful. Bob is at a crucial point in his career. What would people think if they found out he had abandoned his savior? Joe, you've already put him in a difficult position once. Don't make it hard for him a second time, okay? With such scheming, who knows if the death of your parents isn't retribution? I couldn't hold back, and I poured her coffee in her face. She could say anything, but she shouldn't have mentioned my deceased parents. Joe, what are you doing? Bob quickly shielded Sue in front of him. I pointed at her. She insulted my parents. Sue looked very embarrassed, tears swirling in her eyes. I didn't. I was just explaining our past to her. It was her. Bob looked at me fiercely. Apologize. I stared at them for a while, then smiled. Okay. Before apologizing, can I say something to you? Bob remained silent, indicating his agreement. Come a little closer, I'll tell you this in private. He walked over, slightly bending over. Smack. I slapped him with all my strength. Let's get divorced. Bob's face darkened completely. Joe, I've told you, we can't get divorced. It's not that we can't divorce. It's just that you care so much about your reputation. But this time, I wasn't willing to let him suppress himself. Then you can wait to be sued. I turned my wheelchair and left, only to be forcefully pulled from the wheelchair. I was thrown to the ground. Bob's eyes were red. Divorce. Who'd want you now? A cripple like you. I looked at him in disbelief, unable to believe he said that. Am I naturally crippled? Bob was annoyed. Yes. You're my big benefactor for saving me. Please, did I beg you to save me? Did anyone ask if I wanted it? I'd rather be the one disabled. Do you know the pressure this guilt puts on me? I've lost so much for this debt, do you know? He lamented the pressure he faced after owing me half his life. I'd rather you didn't save me. I stared blankly at him, a faint scent of humiliation wafting out. Under the immense humiliation, I lost control. Bob quickly picked me up and put me back in the wheelchair. Look at yourself. What can you do without me now? He looked at me with disdain, covering me with his coat. I'll take you home. Calm down. Bob arranged for a car to take me home. The driver was a plump middle-aged woman. He had instructed her in advance, and gave her a little extra tip to push me inside when we arrived. Perhaps sensing my poor mood, before leaving, she gestured with a thumbs up. There's still hope in life, girl. She may have been afraid I would commit suicide. No way, because just half an hour ago, I received a text message from a stranger. It was a screenshot of a chat. Bob, your sister-in-law is determined to divorce you. It seems like your romantic husband image over there at work won't work anymore. But it's okay, if one path is blocked, we can take another one. Remember the boss I mentioned to you before? He loves playing with disabled people the most. Joe happens to be. Anyway, she's divorcing you. So you can use this opportunity to catch her cheating. Accuse her of infidelity. That way, you won't have to bear the shame of abandoning the person who saved your life. Tomorrow night at 9. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance. The person said a lot, and Bob's reply completely disappointed me. So ruthless, blaming me for saving him, putting pressure on him, and still wanting to squeeze out my last bit of value to pave the way for him. I don't know who sent me that text, but whoever it is, I have to thank them. Joe, I'm back. Bob came back, completely drunk. He staggered over to me and squatted down. I'm sorry for being a jerk during the day. Can we not get divorced? I looked at him calmly, gave him a gentle smile. Okay. Really? I nodded, handed him a cup of hot milk. I was also at fault for what happened during the day. Drink this milk and sober up. I booked tickets for the Maldives tomorrow. How about we travel together? Bob was first flustered, then confused. Tomorrow. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Okay. I smiled and handed him the milk, watching him drink it. The effect of the medicine came quickly, and Bob, as I expected, passed out. It's really troublesome when someone can't walk. It took me a whole 2 hours to chop off Bob's legs. He woke up in the middle, screaming wildly, making me have to stop and stuff a towel into his mouth. He shook his head frantically. I quickly reassured him. It's okay. I'm not going to kill you. You only need your 2 legs anyway. Since you don't care, I might as well take them back. He made a whimpering sound, probably begging for mercy. I stuck the chat record on his face, and he finally quieted down, left only in pain and despair. As dawn broke, I finally cut off his 2 legs. The knife was completely blunt. Bob fainted several times, waking up again. After I was done, I removed the towel from his mouth, and he was already on the verge of death. Joe, forget it. I stuffed it back in his mouth. I didn't feel like listening. I woke up too late. My life was already ruined the moment I lost my legs. Since he wanted to completely ruin me, I had to take the initiative to ruin him first. I lit coals in the room, cuddling him gently to sleep. It's great. At the moment of awakening, the world was rid of a human-faced beast. I never thought I could open my eyes again. The feeling of numbness in my legs made me wide-eyed uncontrollably. I was reborn, back to before the accident happened. I jumped up immediately in the laboratory, startling everyone else there. Hey, are you okay? I stared at my legs, trembling with excitement. It's now 1:27 p.m. on May 8th, with only 10 minutes until the ceiling loosens and falls. In the past, I risked my life to push Bob aside and got trapped under the falling ceiling. Feeling the strength in my legs, I trembled with excitement. Dear, Bob called me out in disbelief. The next moment, the ceiling collapsed, and Bob, bewildered, fainted. Out of moral obligation, I made the call for emergency 120 to help Bob. The doctor said Bob's legs were useless, and he could only live in a wheelchair from now on. I had to stifle my laughter. Joe, why didn't you save me? Bob woke up, his voice hoarse, crying, as if I was an ungrateful person. You could have pushed me away. I tilted my head. Bob, stop pretending. I know you're back too. Before we got married, Bob never called me dear, and just now he asked why I didn't save him. The uncovered truth made Bob blush. He wanted to gain the moral high ground and make me feel guilty. I sat beside him, gently patting his leg. Bob, your legs are gone. Do you remember what you said to me in the past life? Did I beg you to save me? Did anyone ask if I wanted it? I'd rather be disabled myself. I smiled at him. You didn't want it, right? Congratulations, you got your wish. You don't have to feel guilty because of me. You've just lost your legs now, but you're clear and open. You don't have to force yourself to bear unnecessary responsibilities. Bob stood there, his face as colorful as a spillover color palette. Joe, how did I not see that you're crazy before? Can't you differentiate between a joke and a real statement? His expression paralleled the shameless look he had in the past life, saying he didn't need my help. Saved him, he blames me. Don't save him, he still blames me. I was so angry, I just slapped him. Does he know I'm crazy? Does he want to lose another leg? When Bob heard my words, he suddenly trembled. So much has happened back to back. He almost forgot how he died miserably in his past life. It was my fault. I didn't like you. This life doesn't need a forced connection. He is trying hard to save his face. 10 minutes later, Aunt hurriedly came in. Aunt, you don't need to be too sad. At least he's still alive. As long as he's alive, I comforted Aunt symbolically. Before marrying Bob, she genuinely treated me like a daughter. After getting married, she genuinely cared for me, but that kind of care could not match the passage of time and her son's size. So when Bob's cousin bullied me, she chose to turn a blind eye. Joe, be wise. Bob was a little anxious. He didn't want Aunt to worry, but now he couldn't even turn over by himself. Joe, his father and I are busy. Thank you for taking care of Iggy, said Aunt, tears welling up as she held my hand. I know you are interested in Iggy, but under the circumstances. With tears choking her voice, I understood her concern. She was worried that no one would want Bob, just as she had worried about me back then. I didn't hesitate to speak up. Aunt, I only treat Bob as a brother. Besides, Bob already has a girlfriend. Aunt looked at Bob in disbelief, tightly pursing his lips. He didn't want to reveal the truth so soon, but I had put him on the spot. I just informed her to come. I added, I don't want to be a third party breaking up someone else's relationship. I hope you understand. As soon as I finished speaking, Sue, dressed in white, appeared at the door with a shocked and tearful expression. Aunt's reaction was similar, shocked and in tears. Aunt had seen Sue before and didn't quite like this girl, because she had 2 sisters and a brother, and such a family was not good enough for her son. Only this time, Aunt couldn't say much and made an excuse to buy food and left. Iggy, the tearful little white flower, looked particularly pitiful, but Bob avoided her gaze. Joe, you shouldn't have called her here. How can I? He couldn't continue as a faint yellow liquid spread on the sheets. Sue subconsciously took 2 steps back, her eyes showing a hint of disdain. Bob caught this scene, and his dignity was harder hit. Joe, he pleaded with his eyes. I remained unmoved. What are you expecting from me in this situation? Your girlfriend is here. Is this appropriate? After scolding Bob, I turned to Sue and said, Miss Sue, I have heard some details about your love story. If you truly love each other, you must be prepared to take care of a disabled person for a lifetime. Under my urging and moral pressure, Sue struggled to help Bob up. The bathroom door slammed shut, and I didn't miss Sue's resentful look. I chuckled. When faced with adversity in their past, they could indulge in an unattainable noble love. In different places, under the pressure of life, can they still be so determined? After a simple chat with Aunt, I left. Bob has his mother and girlfriend. He naturally doesn't need me, an idler, to cause trouble. I lived my life as usual, went to class as usual, free to walk, free to run. The long-lost sense of freedom fascinated me. I heard that Bob was relentless, training for recovery every day, but unfortunately, there was no progress. Aunt contacted me intermittently, expressing her dissatisfaction with Sue, saying that she couldn't take care of Bob, and wasn't as attentive as me. It was just the same old story. She wasn't good at taking care of Bob, and she lacked my attention to detail. Bob also wanted to find me, but all his contacts were blocked by me. Until 3 months later, while dining with my fellow students, I ran into Bob. Sue was pushing him, and their expressions were not too good. Joe was busy scolding Bob, unaware of my presence. What are you, a cripple, doing here? Shameful, right? The disdainful tone was a stark contrast to Sue's earlier gentleness. It was no wonder that Joe flew into a rage. I had quietly investigated. Bob's so-called romantic love story was a result of Joe's long-standing plan. Joe came from a difficult family background, hoping to find a man from a rich family, not too bright, to change her fate. Bob appeared at the right time, but unfortunately, my intervention changed everything from his previous life. As for this life being looked down on, Bob's face turned red. If I hadn't come, how would I know what you and your friends were saying about me? Joe coldly smiled, saying that you're a cripple, a man who is no longer useful. Are they wrong? Look at yourself. I have to help you even go to the toilet. What else can you do? If it wasn't to escape that family, who would be willing to be with a cripple like you? Bob trembled. What did you say? Ignoring his murderous look, Joe continued, if I had known that taking care of a cripple was so troublesome, I should have changed my target from the beginning. Bob yelled, divorce. Let's end this before the wedding. Apparently, they had already registered their marriage. It seemed that Bob also knew his son's condition, and couldn't be too picky. Joe, with no reservation, punched him twice. Divorce. Don't you think I want that? Taking care of you for 3 months. I'm about to puke. If it weren't for your damn mother, you would have already. Bob choked out an apology to me. I had no idea life, as a disabled person, would be so. Suddenly, the big screen interrupted Bob's confession. I saw Lisa standing up excitedly. Joe, why don't you go steal the wedding? How about on the 10th of next month? Lisa, you couldn't possibly like. How is that possible? How could I like my cousin? Well, maybe a little, but he's my actual cousin. So it's definitely not possible. So I want to find a good sister-in-law for my cousin, Lisa said. There were no visuals on the screen, but my conversation with Lisa was heard by everyone. This chaotic wedding became even more chaotic. Lisa screamed and demanded the music to be turned off. Sue strode forward and grabbed her, landing a few punches. She kept muttering curses, and no one could stop her. Growing up in a rural family that favored boys, Lisa was never going to be a delicate flower. Thinking back to the peaceful times we spent chatting at the restaurant, seeing her now was nothing but ironic. I quietly slipped away from the chaos, leaving behind Bob calling out for me. Later, I heard from others what happened next. Lisa's hidden thoughts were exposed, leading to a big argument between her parents and her older brother. They blamed Joe for doing something inappropriate that caused Lisa to develop these misguided feelings. The uncle, who was already disappointed in Joe, gave up on him completely. Even the aunt reluctantly let go of her son. Thankfully, the mother of the illegitimate child was already dead, so they could treat him as their own and build a bond with him. Sue was on the brink of madness, losing all dignity and earning a reputation as a troublemaker. She wanted a divorce, but the Shen family wasn't going to let her off easily. They believed they had lost a son because of her influence over Joe. If it weren't for her meddling with Joe, he and I could have been together. With my feelings for Joe, how could I not save him in that accident? If he ended up with a broken leg, I could have married him. The Bob's family would have been happy with this turn of events. They were ready to seize the opportunity. My last bit of sympathy for the Shen family vanished. 6 months later, Bob committed suicide, taking Sue with him. I heard she had a connection with Leo and introduced Bob to an old man with peculiar tastes. After that, Joe woke up and went completely insane. He cried, admitting his mistakes and blaming Sue for everything. In his delirium, he said he would change time once again, choosing himself this time. He hired someone to sneak into his house and switched Sue's usual supplements with sleeping pills. While she was unconscious, he set the house on fire, ending both their lives. After Joe's death, I received a letter from him. I assumed it was just some empty remorse, so I didn't even bother opening the envelope. I threw it directly into the trash. Starting over, not possible. God doesn't give second chances to the wicked. Even if there were endless repeats, I wouldn't waver for him. I have clear life goals. I will only strive to become a better version of myself. The end.